He studied the passage in the small book again. The book was not bound in dark leather taken from some creature of the night, nor written on a fragile parchment of human skin, but it ought perhaps to have been, because the matters explained therein were compellingly evil. Mindog had long since learned that content, not form, mattered. He was glad that this fact had bypassed so many of his peers. He got up from his seat in the book-filled small apartment the Countess had set aside for him. That was a calculated insult on her part, and one that had failed to put him in his place. The books there contained a far wider realm than she herself controlled. The details of this magic, well, he doubted she would read them. But she had a fascination with blood, for obvious reasons. She would not care what came of her experiments, of the lusts generated or the offspring created, but he, Mindog, would control them. The keys to that control were right here in this book. Unlike his former master, the Black Brain, who had taken possession of the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Elizabeth did not care for the less than immediate and proximal things. Power over the rulers of Hungary was sufficient, as long as her comfort and vanity were ministered to. Mindog did not threaten her directly with his machinations, but when she finally paid her price, or if Chernobog finally took on one foe too great or too many, Mindog would be ready. He would return to his lands on the edge of Kiev and Rus. The throne of the Grand Duchy was a short step from there. Alternatively, if certain variables came to pass, he might instead become the power behind the throne of Hungary. That would be less satisfactory than seizing power directly in Lithuania, of course, but it might do well enough. Unlike most of those he maneuvered against, Count Mindog had no interest in power for its own sake. He was ultimately a cautious nature. He needed power, preferably great power, simply because he could ill afford to let anyone else have it. Such had been the great lesson his life had taught him. But first, he needed to persuade the Countess that she needed the blood of the dragon. As was his way, honed by long practice in the Grand Duke's court, he would do it by telling her that she needed something else. It never ceased to amaze him how those who had vast, immense power seemed very often to be so stupid. He supposed it had something to do with having untrammeled power and having it for so long. Jerusalem, in the lands of II Khan Mongol. Jerusalem the Golden lay behind him, outside, with its noise and heat and smells. It seemed as far away right now as fabled Cathay. Enico Lopez knelt in a small chapel, a simple, humble place as befitted the faith of the humble, because in the face of God, all men, even the greatest, are as dust motes. He saw how the dust motes danced in the sunlight of the Levant, as the light shone through the high-slit window. Dust motes, yet the Father cared for and numbered even the least of those motes, he knew. Enico knew, too, that pride had always been his weakness. Here, at last, on the Hill of Skulls, where the greatest had humbled himself, given himself as a willing sacrifice, Enico knew that he had been weak, and that despite this, he was still beloved. It was no great moment of epiphany, but rather the blossoming of a slow-developing plant. Perhaps he was lightheaded with hunger from his vigil, but the path, so obscure, now seemed clear. Alexandria. Alexandria, the seductress of the East, luscious, perfumed, and corrupt, and home to the greatest library on earth, a repository of more thaumaturgy.